The first 3 days in my new home were the quietest I'd known in nearly a decade. I'd wake up not to the sound of a blaring alarm clock or the distant thud of my grandson's video games, but to the gentle rhythmic lapping of water against the rocky shore of the lake. My little house, a cozy 2-bedroom cottage nestled in the heart of the Missouri Ozarks, wasn't grand. It wasn't a mansion built to impress, but it was a fortress of solitude I had built for myself, penny by painful penny, dream by deferred dream. The air inside smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, and outside, it carried the rich perfume of pine needles and damp earth, a scent of freedom I hadn't realized I was so desperately missing. I spent that first morning just sitting on my screened-in porch, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, watching the sunlight shatter into a million diamonds on the water's surface. This was it. This was the first day of the rest of my life. A life that was finally, completely, and unapologetically mine. But peace, I've learned from a long and difficult life, is a fragile thing. A delicate glass ornament that can be shattered by a single careless word. I'd barely unpacked the last of the boxes, the one with the good linens I'd been saving, when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. The voice on the other end was instantly recognizable, a high, chirpy tone that always set my teeth on edge. It was my daughter-in-law, Jessica. "We'll be there in 2 hours," she announced, her voice a steamroller of cheerful entitlement, lacking any warmth or preamble. "With 20 family members. Prepare rooms and food. We're staying for a month." She said it with the casual authority of someone ordering a pizza, not someone appending another person's entire existence. She expected me to roll over and play the doormat I'd been for years. She expected me to say, "Of course, dear. I'll start cooking now." But as I stood there, phone pressed hard against my ear, a cold, unfamiliar resolve washed over me. They had no idea what I was really preparing for them. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of my little welcome party, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. It's a comfort to know I'm not alone, even when telling a story that made me feel so isolated. Drop your city or country in the comments, and let me know what time it is where you are. It's truly amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Now back to the call that started it all. There was no "Congratulations on the new place, Carol." No. "I hope we're not imposing, but we were wondering." It was a declaration. A royal decree from Queen Jessica. 20 people. Her family, not mine. For an entire month. My mind raced, doing the impossible math. My 2 spare bedrooms and 1.5 baths. 20 people. The septic system, the well water, the astronomical grocery bills. The sheer unrelenting noise. It was a home invasion disguised as a family vacation, and I was being cast as the unpaid innkeeper and chef. "Jessica," I started, my voice sounding thin and distant to my own ears. I cleared my throat, trying to find some strength. That's a lot of people. I've only just moved in. I don't think I have the space." Her laugh was sharp like the crack of a whip. "Oh, Carol, don't be silly. We'll make it work. You're so good at making things work. Just pull out some air mattresses. The kids can sleep on the floor. It'll be fun. Like camping." Fun for whom? For me, who would be scrubbing toilets and cooking vats of spaghetti for an army. For me, whose hard-won sanctuary was about to be turned into a chaotic, messy frat house? I thought about all the years I had sacrificed, all the times I had bitten my tongue until I could taste blood, all the holidays I'd hosted, the countless meals I'd cooked, the mountains of laundry I'd folded, all without a single genuine word of thanks. "We're about an hour out now," she chirped, completely bulldozing over my hesitation. "Can't wait to see the place. See you soon." The line went dead, but the silence it left behind was deafening. It was heavier and more oppressive than any noise. I looked out at my calm, beautiful lake, but all I could see was the reflection of a coming storm. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this time I couldn't just stand there and let it wash over me. This time I had to be the storm. To understand why that phone call didn't send me into a spiral of weeping panic, you have to understand the 7 years that came before it. You have to understand the basement. After my husband, David, passed away from a sudden heart attack, my world didn't just fall apart. It imploded. We had been a team, David and I. He was my rock, my partner, my best friend. Without him, the 4-bedroom house we'd shared felt like a cavernous, echoing mausoleum of memories I couldn't bear. My son Mark and his wife Jessica offered me their basement. "Just until you get back on your feet, Mom," Mark had said, his eyes full of what I mistook for genuine concern. I was grateful. I was drowning in grief. I said yes. Getting back on my feet turned into a 7-year sentence in a nicely furnished prison. The basement was finished, yes, with a small bedroom and a bathroom, but it was still a basement. It had tiny windows that let in slivers of daylight, and I could always hear the thumping of feet and the muffled sounds of their life happening above me, a constant reminder of my subterranean existence. My life, which had once been full of friends and hobbies and partnership, shrank to fit those subterranean walls. I was expected to be the live-in, unpaid everything. I'd wake up early to the sound of them getting ready for work and school, and I'd go upstairs to make breakfast and pack lunches. I'd do their laundry. All of it, including Jessica's delicate items she didn't trust the machine with. I'd clean their house top to bottom, because Jessica claimed to have a dust allergy. Jessica, who worked a part-time remote job, would often praise my efficiency with a patronizing smile. "You're just so good at this domestic stuff, Carol," she'd say without ever lifting a finger. "It really frees me up to focus on my career." They never charged me rent, a fact Jessica loved to wield like a weapon whenever she felt I wasn't being sufficiently grateful. "You have it so good here, Carol. No mortgage, no bills." Most mothers would kill for this arrangement. She was right. I didn't pay with money. I paid with my time, my energy, my dignity. I paid with my silence. I paid by slowly, systematically becoming invisible. I was a household appliance, a convenience they had grown accustomed to. My opinions on how to raise the children were dismissed. My needs for quiet or privacy were ignored. I was just Mom, the woman in the basement who made the best pot roast and always knew where the extra batteries were. The final straw, the one that broke the camel's back, came about a year before I finally moved out. It was something so small yet so significant. I had saved up a little money from my Social Security and bought a new expensive pair of noise-canceling headphones. They were my one escape. In the evenings I could put them on, listen to an audiobook or some classical music, and for a little while I could pretend I wasn't in a basement. I could pretend I was somewhere else. One afternoon, I came home from a walk to find them on the floor of the living room, snapped cleanly in half. My youngest grandson had apparently used them for a game of tug-of-war with the dog. When I showed them to Jessica, my voice trembling with a grief that was about more than just headphones, she just shrugged. "Oh honey, that's a shame. But you know how kids are. Just a thing. You can get another one. It's just a thing." That's what I had become to them. My one small piece of peace, my one escape from the constant noise of their lives, was just a thing that could be broken and dismissed without a second thought. That night I didn't sleep. I went online and started looking for small properties for sale, hours away from them. It took me a full year of secret saving, of selling off the last of the jewelry David had given me, but I did it. I found my little house on the lake. When I told Mark and Jessica I was moving, they were shocked. Not sad, but visibly inconvenienced. "Who's going to watch the kids after school?" Jessica had asked, her brow furrowed in annoyance, not concern for my well-being. That was the moment I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I had made the right decision. This house wasn't just a building. It was my emancipation proclamation. It was the physical manifestation of my own value. A place where I was no longer an appliance but the owner. A place where my things wouldn't be broken, and my peace wouldn't be shattered. Or so I had desperately hoped. But as I stood there in my own kitchen, a quiet, cold strength began to bubble up from a place I thought had long since run dry. They had mistaken my silence for weakness for the very last. I didn't cry. I didn't pace the floors or wring my hands. The woman who lived in the basement would have done that. The woman who lived in the basement would have started frantically planning menus and figuring out where to buy cheap air mattresses. The woman who owned this house acted. I walked over to the kitchen drawer, the one I had just lined with fresh, crisp paper that smelled faintly of lavender, and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a black felt-tip pen. The pen felt solid and purposeful in my hand, a tool, a weapon. At the top of the clean lined page I wrote the date in firm, clear script. Then with a ruler from the same drawer, I drew a thick, dark line right down the middle of the page, dividing it into 2 perfect columns. It was a line in the sand. On the left side I wrote the heading, Guest Preparations. This was the list for the role I was about to play. The role of the accommodating, slightly overwhelmed but ultimately compliant mother-in-law. Underneath I started a list, my handwriting deliberately a little looser, a little less precise. Groceries, towels, sleeping arrangements, trash bags, paper plates and plastic cutlery. This was the list of the old Carol. The Carol who would put everyone else's comfort before her own sanity. It was a list of surrender. I felt a familiar wave of resentment and anxiety wash over me as I wrote it. But I pushed it down. This list was a necessary camouflage. It was the stage dressing for the drama that was about to unfold. Then I turned my attention to the right side of the page. My hand stopped shaking. A strange, cold calm settled over me. The kind of clarity that comes only when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. I wrote the heading in sharp, block letters, Homeowner's Defense. My list here was very different. It was precise. It was calculated. Bylaws. County clerk. A short-term lodging agreement. A sheriff's office. Documentation. The first call I made was to a number I found in the thick welcome packet from my realtor. It was for the Lakeview Estates Homeowners Association. A pleasant-sounding woman named Brenda answered on the second ring. I explained that I was a new resident and had a question about a large upcoming family gathering. "Oh, how lovely," she said, her voice warm. "Welcome to the neighborhood. We're so glad to have you." "Thank you," I replied, my voice smooth as silk. "I'm so excited to be here. I was just wondering, to make sure I'm being a good neighbor, are there any specific rules regarding the number of guests or extended stays?" Her tone shifted slightly, becoming more professional, more serious. "Well, yes, there are. We value our peace and quiet here. For the integrity of our shared septic and road systems, and for the general tranquility of the community, any stay longer than 7 consecutive days with more than double the household occupancy, which for your property is 4 people, is considered a short-term rental situation and requires a permit. It's also subject to our strict noise ordinance after 10 p.m. It's all in Section 4B of the bylaws if you want to read the specifics." "Thank you, Brenda," I said, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. "That's exactly what I needed to know. You've been a great help." Ammunition. The word echoed in my mind. For 7 long years, I had been unarmed in a silent battle of wills. Now I was building an arsenal. I spent the next 45 minutes online, downloading a standard ironclad short-term rental agreement template from a reputable legal website. I filled in the blanks, property address, my name as owner, and left the guest name blank. I printed 25 copies just in case they brought friends. By the time I hung up the phone after a similarly informative call to the county clerk's office, I had all the ammunition I needed. Now all I had to do was set the stage for the final act. And right on cue, through the kitchen window, I saw the first of the minivans turn off the main road, its tires spitting gravel. I heard the crunch of the driveway. The show was about to begin. The first minivan was a battered-looking Honda Odyssey, its suspension groaning under the weight of its contents, packed to the gills with coolers and duffel bags. It was followed by a massive, gas-guzzling Ford Expedition, then another minivan, and finally, a sedan with a rooftop carrier that looked like it was about to burst. It wasn't a family arriving for a visit. It was a caravan of entitlement, a conquering army. They didn't spill out so much as they erupted onto my newly raked gravel driveway. A chaotic explosion of loud voices and clashing personalities. I stood on my porch and counted. 22. Jessica couldn't even get the number right, or more likely she just didn't care. The greetings were a cacophony of uncoordinated noise. A few vague waves in my direction. No hugs. No one came up to the porch to say, "Thank you for having us," or "What a beautiful home." Jessica emerged from the expedition, talking loudly on her phone, and gave me a distracted "hey," before turning her attention to directing the unloading like a disgruntled drill sergeant. Her cousin, a large, sullen man in his 30s with a sour expression permanently etched on his face, a man I vaguely recognized as Kyle, lumbered past me without a word and walked straight into my house. I followed him, my mouth agape, as he did a quick, appraising tour of the ground floor. He peered into my bedroom, noted the attached bathroom and the view of the lake, then walked back out to the living room and announced to everyone, "I'll take the master. It's got the best view of the lake." Before I could form a single coherent sentence of protest, he had hauled his oversized, mud-splattered suitcase inside and dropped it on my freshly made bed. My bed. The one I had just bought, with the new memory foam mattress and the high thread count sheets I had been so excited to sleep on. I stood there momentarily paralyzed by the sheer breathtaking audacity of it all. It was a power move, a flag planted on conquered territory. The rest of the horde followed his lead. They moved like a colony of ants, swarming and claiming every available space. Bags were dropped on my new sofa, leaving dirt marks. Someone immediately went to the fridge, opened it and yelled across the house, "Hey Jess, your mom's only got regular milk. No almond milk. And is this 1%? Gross." Jessica finally ended her call and walked over to me, placing a hand on my arm in a gesture that was meant to look affectionate but felt possessive, like a brand. "Isn't this great? A real family get-together." She gestured around at the chaos, the noise, the sheer invasion of my personal space. "It's a little tight, but we'll manage. You're a lifesaver, Carol." I didn't feel like a lifesaver. I felt like a ship being boarded by pirates, and I was being forced to hand over the keys to the treasure chest. The questions, or rather demands, started flying from all directions. What's the Wi-Fi password? Is there another bathroom upstairs or just this one? Where do you want us to put the beer coolers? They need to be plugged in. I just pointed vaguely and stepped back, letting them swarm, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I watched as one of the teenagers unplugged my living room lamp, my reading lamp, to charge his phone. I watched as another one put his muddy shoes up on my clean new coffee table. Each small act of disrespect was like a drop of gasoline on a simmering fire within me. I took a deep, steadying breath, walked over to my kitchen counter, and picked up my yellow legal pad. Under my documentation heading on the right side of the page, I made my first entry, my handwriting sharp and precise. 3:15 p.m. Arrival. 22 guests. Cousin Kyle immediately claimed master bedroom. Refrigerator contents criticized. Mud on coffee table. Jessica caught me writing and laughed, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Making a grocery list already? You're so organized." She gave me a smug little smile as if to say, "This is my house now, and you are my servant." I smiled back, a tight, thin line that didn't reach my eyes. "Something like that," I said, underlining the word master twice. But little did she know, I wasn't just making a list. I was building a case. And her smug smile was Exhibit A. The first night was a blur of noise and mess, a descent into a special kind of domestic hell. They ordered a mountain of pizzas and wings, and the greasy boxes were left stacked on the kitchen counter like a leaning tower of cardboard. Beer cans and soda bottles were left on windowsills, porch railings, and even balanced on the back of the toilet. The television in the living room blared with some violent action movie until well past midnight, the sound of explosions and gunfire shaking the thin walls of the small guest room I had been relegated to. Sleep was impossible. I lay there, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, listening to the sounds of my home being violated. The next morning I came out to a war zone. The living room was a minefield of discarded blankets, empty chip bags, and sleeping bodies. The kitchen was worse. Dirty plates were in the sink, on the coffee table, even on the floor. Someone had spilled a sticky, purple soda on my new porch cushions and had simply flipped the cushion over to hide the stain. The entire house smelled of stale beer, greasy cardboard, and unwashed bodies. It was the smell of disrespect. I started cleaning, a grim sense of purpose settling over me. I couldn't stand the filth. As I wiped down the counters, scrubbing at a dried ketchup ring, I made mental notes for my legal pad. Soda stain on porch cushion. Greasy film on all kitchen surfaces. Trash overflowing. Half-eaten pizza slice found under sofa cushion. Around noon, Jessica drifted into the kitchen, yawning, wrapped in my favorite quilt. "Morning," she said, completely oblivious to the mountain of trash I had just hauled outside. "So, what's the plan for breakfast?" "I'm starving." I just pointed to the box of cereal and the gallon of regular milk on the counter. She wrinkled her nose but poured herself a bowl anyway, leaving the box open and the milk out on the counter when she was done. The chaos only escalated. By the afternoon of the second day, the house felt like it was groaning under the strain. Cousin Kyle, deciding he was a handyman, tried to fix a slow drip in the guest bathroom faucet. 10 minutes later, I heard a loud snap followed by a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. I rushed in to find the handle had broken off in his hand, and now water was spraying everywhere, soaking the floor and the wall. He managed to shut it off at the valve under the sink, but the faucet was completely and utterly ruined. When I confronted him, he was completely unapologetic. He just shrugged his massive shoulders and grumbled, "Cheap fixtures. You get what you pay for." He then wiped his greasy hands on one of my clean white dish towels. I just nodded, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. I went to my room, took a clear time-stamped photo of the broken faucet, and added it to my list. Guest bathroom faucet destroyed by Kyle. Estimated replacement cost, $150. Plus potential water damage to subfloor. The days bled into one another in a miserable haze of cooking, cleaning, and documenting. They used every single towel in the house, leaving them in damp, mildewing piles on the floors of the bedrooms and bathrooms. They played loud, thumping music from multiple Bluetooth speakers at all hours, creating a jarring cacophony that gave me a constant, pounding headache. They argued with each other, their loud, angry voices echoing through my once peaceful haven. I tried to talk to Jessica again on the evening of the third day. I found her relaxing in a lounge chair by the lake, scrolling on her phone while her kids threw rocks into the water, scaring away the ducks I had just started to get to know. "Jessica, we need to talk about the noise," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "And the mess. This is getting out of hand." She didn't even look up from her screen. "Carol, relax. We're on vacation. Families are loud and messy. It's part of the fun. You just need to learn to go with the flow." I just nodded and walked away. They thought they were on vacation, but they were actually on probation. And they were failing spectacularly. But what happened the next day went beyond simple disrespect and carelessness. It was pure, willful, malicious destruction. The morning of the third day started with a smell. A foul, gurgling sewer gas smell that seemed to creep up from the drains like a malevolent spirit. I noticed the toilet in the downstairs bathroom, the one most frequently used by the horde, was flushing slowly, the water swirling weakly before reluctantly disappearing. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I put an out-of-order sign on the door and told everyone, in a loud, clear voice, to use the upstairs bathroom only. When I bought the house, the inspector, a thorough man named Frank, had made one thing very, very clear. "You're on a septic system, Carol," he had said, looking at me over his glasses. "It's a good one, a modern one, but it's a delicate ecosystem. Nothing but septic safe, single-ply toilet paper goes down these drains. Nothing. No wipes, no feminine products, no paper towels, no dental floss. You treat it right, it'll last you a lifetime. You abuse it, and you're looking at a 5-figure nightmare." I had explained this to Jessica on the first day in simple, clear terms. I had even taped a polite, handwritten sign above both toilets as a reminder. "Delicate septic system in use. Please flush only toilet paper. Thank you." But politeness, I was learning, was a language this family did not speak. They saw rules as suggestions, and suggestions as an affront to their personal freedom. By mid-afternoon, the gurgling had become a full-blown crisis. The downstairs toilet wasn't just clogged. It was backing up. A foul-smelling gray-brown water was seeping from its base, soaking the new plush bath mat I just bought. The smell was now permeating the entire first floor, a thick, gag-inducing stench. I found Jessica and Kyle on the porch, laughing at some stupid video on Kyle's phone. "Jessica," I said, my voice tight with a rising panic, "there's a serious problem with the plumbing. It's an emergency." She waved a dismissive hand, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Kyle, go jiggle the handle or something. You're the handyman." "It's not a jiggle the handle problem," I insisted, my voice getting louder. "It's backing up. The toilet is overflowing. I think someone flushed something they weren't supposed to." Kyle let out a loud, obnoxious laugh. "Probably just old pipes. This whole place looks like it was built in the 50s. You should have gotten a better inspection. My house was built in 1995. The plumbing was perfectly fine 3 days ago. But arguing was useless. I knew I had to get a professional out here and fast. The problem was I didn't want them to know I was calling a plumber. I didn't want to give them the chance to spin some story to hide the evidence. So I waited. I waited until they all decided to take the minivans into the small nearby town for ice cream and to buy more beer. The moment their cars were out of sight, I was on the phone, my fingers frantically searching for an emergency plumber. I found one who, for a hefty emergency fee, agreed to come out immediately. A man named George, with kind eyes and a weary expression, arrived an hour later. He took one look at the situation and his face grew grim. He spent the next hour working, first with a heavy-duty snake, then with a special camera scope he fed down the pipes. Finally, he came out from the bathroom, wiping his hands on a rag, and his expression was one of professional outrage. "Ma'am," he said, shaking his head slowly, "this wasn't an accident. This was deliberate abuse. Someone has been flushing baby wipes down this toilet. Not one or two but a whole package of them. They formed a massive concrete-like clog, deep in the main line leading to the septic tank. But that's not the worst of it." He showed me the small, grainy screen on his camera device. "See this? These are plastic. Looks like parts of a small action figure and some plastic bottle caps. They're wedged in there good. To clear this, we're going to have to bring in an excavator and dig up a portion of your yard to access the main pipe. It's a major job." I felt the blood drain from my face. How major? He handed me a clipboard with a handwritten estimate. My eyes scanned the numbers and I felt my knees go weak. It was thousands and thousands of dollars. More than I could possibly afford without dipping into my retirement savings. Looking at the plumber's written estimate, the polite signs I had made, the careful instructions I had given, something inside me snapped. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of sabotage. This was no longer about being taken for granted. This was war. And I realized my initial plan wasn't enough. I needed to call in the big guns. My first call wasn't to the sheriff. It was to my son. A small, foolish, motherly part of me still held out hope that Mark would be horrified, that he would finally see his wife and her family for the destructive, selfish people they were. I needed him to be my son, not just her husband. I needed him to choose me. I stepped outside onto the porch, the foul smell from the house clinging to the humid afternoon air, and dialed his number. He was at work, and I knew he hated being interrupted, but this was an emergency. This was a 5-figure emergency. He answered on the third ring, his voice clipped and impatient, the background noise of a busy office buzzing behind him. "Mom? I'm in the middle of a big project. What's up? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "No, Mark, everything is not okay. We have a serious problem here. Someone has destroyed the plumbing. They've flushed toys and a whole package of baby wipes down the toilet. And the plumber said it's going to cost thousands of dollars to fix. The entire system is backing up into the house." I waited for the shock, the outrage, the anger on my behalf. Instead, there was a heavy, weary sigh. "Okay, Mom, calm down. I'm sure it's not that bad. You can sometimes exaggerate." Exaggerate? My voice shot up an octave. "Mark, I am not exaggerating. I have a written estimate in my hand for over $5,000. A man had to put a camera down my toilet. This is not an exaggeration." "Well, you know Jessica's family," he said, his voice lowering as if he didn't want to be overheard by his colleagues. "They can be a little careless. I'm sure it was an accident. One of the kids probably just didn't know any better." "An accident?" I nearly shouted, my composure cracking. "Mark, the plumber said it was deliberate. He said it was the worst case of system abuse he's seen in years. And that's not all. They've taken over my bedroom, they've broken a faucet. The house is a complete disaster. And they're treating me like their personal servant." There was another long, telling pause on the other end of the line. Then came the words that broke the last remaining thread of hope I had. The words that severed a cord between us that I never thought could be cut. "Mom, Jessica called me this morning. She said you were being a little hostile, making everyone feel unwelcome. She says you're not being very flexible." Flexible? The word hit me like a physical slap in the face. For 7 years I had been so flexible I had nearly broken in half for them. I had bent and twisted myself into whatever shape they needed me to be, and it was still not enough. My voice dropped, losing all its heat and leaving only a chilling, dangerous ice. "Hostile? Mark, I am in my own home. A home I bought with every last cent I had after your father died. And I am being treated like an intruder. Your wife's family is literally destroying it from the inside out. And you're telling me to be flexible. Their family, Mom, he mumbled, the classic cowardly excuse. No, Mark, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. They are her family. And you have made it very clear for a very long time that you are part of her family, not mine. I just needed to hear you say it one last time so I could stop pretending. Mom, that's not fair. Fair. I cut him off, my voice like steel. Don't you dare talk to me about what's fair. I've been fair my whole life, and all it's gotten me is a basement bedroom and a broken spirit. But that's over. That Carol is gone. That silence on the other end of the line was all the answer I needed. I had lost my son to that woman years ago. I just hadn't been willing to admit it to myself. Now, with nothing left to lose, I was ready to execute the final phase of my plan. You made your choice, Mark, I said softly, but my words carried the weight of a final judgment. Now I'm making mine. I ended the call before he could say another word, before he could offer another weak excuse. The line was cut, in more ways than one. The conversation with Mark was the final brutal push I needed. There was no more room for doubt, no more second-guessing, no more foolish hope for a family reconciliation. They had drawn the battle lines, and I was finally fully ready to fight back. The entitled caravan returned from their ice cream trip, loud and oblivious, complaining that the small town was boring and didn't have a Starbucks. They didn't seem to notice the lingering foul smell. Or maybe they just didn't care. They were too absorbed in their own world of instant gratification to pay attention to the consequences of their actions. They just turned up the volume on their Bluetooth speakers and cracked open more beers. While they settled in for an afternoon of watching TV, napping, and generally treating my home like a rundown youth hostel, I retreated to my small guest room. It felt more like a command center now, the nerve center of a quiet rebellion. I pulled out the 25 copies of the short-term lodging agreement I had printed on the first day. With a steady hand and a heart of stone, I began to fill them out. At the top, under daily rate, I wrote in a clear, firm hand, $140 per person per night. I had looked up the average rate for vacation rentals in the area, and my price was perfectly reasonable. Under security deposit, I wrote, $500 per person due in advance. This was to cover any potential future damages. And then I added a new handwritten clause at the bottom of the page, my own personal touch, and I initialed it. Under damages, I wrote, guest assumes full financial responsibility for any and all damages to the property, including but not limited to plumbing and septic systems, as assessed by a licensed professional. A copy of the current damage estimate is attached, and is due with the initial deposit. Next, I pulled out the written estimate from George the plumber. The number at the bottom still made my stomach clench. $5,450. I made 25 high-quality color copies of it on the small all-in-one printer/scanner I had brought with me. I did the same with Section 4B of the HOA bylaws regarding occupancy limits, using a bright yellow highlighter to draw attention to the key phrases. Stay longer than 7 days, and more than double the household occupancy. My little pile of documents was growing. It was a dossier of disrespect, a paper trail of their entitlement, a legal trap I was carefully setting. My final call of the day was to the Benton County Sheriff's Office. I used the non-emergency number I had written on my legal pad. A calm, professional dispatcher answered. Ma'am, how can I help you? Hello, I said, my voice steady and formal. My name is Carol Peterson. My address is 124 Willow Creek Lane. I'm a new resident out at Lakeview Estates. I'm having a significant issue with a large number of uninvited long-term guests. I do not believe they will be violent, but they are extremely hostile and are refusing to respect my property or my requests for them to make other arrangements. I would like to formally request a civil standby tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to ensure the peace while I serve them with a lodging agreement or, failing that, a notice to vacate. The dispatcher didn't sound surprised. I got the feeling this wasn't an uncommon call in a popular vacation area. She took down my information, the address, the number of people involved, and confirmed the time. We can have a deputy there at 0900 hours, Miss Peterson. He will be there to keep the peace, but he cannot legally evict anyone without a court order. I understand completely, I said. I just need a witness to ensure things don't escalate. Understood, ma'am. A deputy will be there. Thank you, I said, and a wave of profound relief washed over me. Thank you very much. Everything was in place. The documents sat in a neat, formidable pile on the desk in my room. Tonight I would try to sleep in a house full of enemies. But tomorrow I would take my home back. They thought they had one. They were laughing and feasting in my living room, oblivious. They had no idea they were about to be served with an eviction notice, my style. I was up before the sun, long before the first rays of light touched the surface of the lake. The house was quiet, but it was a heavy, bloated silence, the kind that comes after a storm. The air was thick with the smell of stale pizza, spilled beer, and the faint, foul odor from the downstairs bathroom that even my best air fresheners couldn't conquer. The living room was a disaster zone of empty chip bags, discarded shoes, and sleeping bodies sprawled on my air mattresses and even on my sofa. They looked like refugees from a party that had gone on too long, not guests in a home. I moved with the quiet, deliberate purpose of a soldier preparing for battle. First, I made myself a strong black cup of coffee and took it out to the screened-in porch. I watched the thick mist rise off the lake as the sky slowly turned from a deep, bruised gray to a soft, hopeful pink. This was my haven, my sanctuary, and I was about to go to war for it. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and went back inside. At 8:30 a.m., I began my preparations. I cleared off the large oak dining room table, wiping away the sticky rings from soda cans and sweeping up a mountain of crumbs with my hand. Then I began to set the table. Not for breakfast but for business. I placed 22 neat stacks of paper around the table, each one a place setting of accountability. Each stack contained 3 documents, paper clipped together in a precise professional manner. 1. The short-term lodging agreement with the daily rates and the handwritten damage clause clearly visible at the bottom. 2. A color copy of the Lakeview Estates HOA bylaws, with Section 4B, Guest and Occupancy Limitations, highlighted in a bright, unmissable yellow. 3. A color copy of the plumber's $5,000 estimate for repairing the septic line, with the description of the deliberate abuse circled in red pen. Beside each formidable stack of papers, I placed a brand new black ballpoint pen. The first person to stir was, predictably, Jessica. She came downstairs around 8:45, wrapped in my favorite handmade quilt, her hair a tangled mess. She was yawning, heading for the kitchen on autopilot. "Is there any coffee?" she mumbled, then she stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at the meticulously arranged table, a look of utter confusion on her sleepy face. Her eyes slowly scanned the documents, the pens, the highlighted sections. A slow, confused smile spread across her face. "What is this? Some kind of joke, Carol?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep and condescension. "Are you playing hotel manager?" "Good morning, Jessica," I said, my voice calm and even. I was standing by the front door, my arms crossed over my chest, my posture straight and unyielding. "It's not a joke. It's a lodging agreement. A condition of your continued stay in my private residence." Her laugh was short and sharp, a bark of disbelief. "Okay, very funny. You really had me going for a second there. You're a riot, Carol." She picked up one of the agreements, her eyes scanning the daily rate. The smile vanished from her face as if it had been wiped clean. Her face hardened, the condescension replaced by a flash of anger. "You're serious," she whispered, the words full of disbelief and outrage. "You're actually certifiably insane." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because at that exact moment, the doorbell chimed, a clear, bright sound that cut through the tense silence. It was 9 o'clock on the dot. Jessica's face went from mocking to pale white in a split second. She looked from me to the door, a flicker of real panic in her eyes. "Who is that? Are you expecting someone?" I opened the door. Standing on my porch was a uniformed officer from the Benton County Sheriff's Office. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a kind but no-nonsense face that radiated authority. His name tag read Deputy Miller. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Deputy Miller. You called for a civil standby." "Yes, Deputy," I said, my voice steady as a rock. I stepped aside to let him in. "Thank you for coming. Please come in." Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The color had completely drained from her face. "You called the cops on your own family?" she stammered, her voice a horrified, incredulous squeak. I turned to her and gave her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. A smile I'd been practicing in the mirror for 7 long years. "Oh no, dear," I said, my voice as sweet as poison. "I just called for an official witness. Now, shall we discuss the terms of your stay?" The sight of a uniformed sheriff's deputy in my living room had a remarkable sobering effect. The groggy, hungover members of the family who were starting to trickle downstairs, drawn by the commotion, stopped dead in their tracks. The loud chatter, the yawning, the complaining, it all died instantly. You could have heard a pin drop on the dirty carpet. Deputy Miller was the picture of professionalism. He wasn't aggressive or accusatory. He just had an aura of calm, unshakable authority. He surveyed the scene. The sleeping bags on the floor, the general mess, the 22 stunned faces staring at him, and then looked at me, waiting for my lead. "Ma'am, would you like to explain the situation to your guests?" he asked, his voice neutral and steady. I nodded, feeling a surge of strength. "Yes, Deputy. Thank you." I turned my attention to the assembled group. Jessica was still standing by the table, looking like she'd been struck by lightning. Kyle had come downstairs and was scowling from the hallway, his arms crossed over his massive chest in a failed attempt to look intimidating. "As you can all see," I began, my voice clear and steady, resonating in the quiet room, "I have prepared some paperwork for you this morning. This is my home. It is private property. It is not a hotel, it is not a public campground, and it is not a free-for-all." I picked up one of the lodging agreements from the table, holding it up for all to see. This document outlines the terms and conditions for any guest wishing to stay on this property for longer than 24 hours. The rate is $140 per person per night, with a $500 security deposit per person, to be paid in advance via cash or cashier's check. A wave of shocked, angry muttering rippled through the room. Someone in the back scoffed loudly. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice rising slightly to cut through the noise, my gaze sweeping across their indignant faces, "this agreement states that guests are fully and financially liable for all damages to the property. This includes the $5,450 repair that is needed for the septic system, which was severely damaged by the flushing of foreign objects. A copy of the plumber's official estimate is provided for your convenience." I gestured to the table, a grand sweep of my arm. "You have 2 options this morning. Option 1. You can each sign the agreement and provide payment in full within the hour. Option 2. You can pack your belongings and vacate the premises within the next 3 hours. Deputy Miller is here simply to ensure that this process remains peaceful and orderly." Jessica finally found her voice. It was shrill and cracking with disbelief. "This is insane. You can't do this. This is our family vacation. We're family." Deputy Miller cleared his throat, a small quiet sound that immediately commanded everyone's attention. All eyes snapped to him. "Actually, ma'am," he said calmly, his gaze fixed on Jessica, "she absolutely can. This is her legal residence. Under Missouri state law, anyone who stays on a property without a formal lease agreement and without the owner's ongoing consent can be considered a trespasser. Ms. Peterson is offering you a formal agreement to legitimize your stay. If you refuse the terms of that agreement, she has every legal right to ask you to leave. If you refuse to leave after being asked, then it becomes a criminal trespassing issue." His words, delivered so matter-of-factly, hung in the air like a death sentence to their free vacation. The legal reality of the situation crashed down on them. They weren't just being rude guests anymore. They were potential criminals. Kyle stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a pathetic display of bravado. "This is entrapment. She let us come here. She invited us." "I did not," I corrected him calmly, my voice cutting through his bluster. "I received a phone call informing me that you were coming. There is a legal and moral difference. I did not invite 22 people to live in my home for a month and systematically destroy it." The room was dead silent except for the sound of 22 jaws hitting the floor. Jessica looked from the deputy to me to the contracts on the table. For the first time since I had known her, she was utterly speechless. The ball was in her court, and she had just been served an ace. Of course nobody signed. The idea of paying nearly $3,000 per night, plus a collective $11,000 security deposit and over $5,000 in immediate damages, was so far outside their realm of reality that they just stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. The entitlement that had fueled their entire lives had just slammed head-on into a wall of legal consequences, and they were stunned. The defiance crumbled quickly, replaced by a bitter, resentful compliance. The packing began. It wasn't quiet or orderly. It was a symphony of slammed drawers, muttered curses, and the angry thud of suitcases being dragged across my wooden floors. They were no longer treating my house with careless disrespect. Now it was with active, petty malice. I stood by the front door with Deputy Miller, a silent sentinel. His calm, steady presence was a godsend. It kept their simmering anger from boiling over into anything more than passive aggression. But the air was thick with it. It was a tangible thing. A toxic fog of their wounded pride. One of Jessica's sisters, a woman named Brenda who hadn't spoken 2 words to me the entire time, brushed past me, deliberately knocking my shoulder hard. "I hope you're happy," she hissed, her face contorted in a sneer. "All alone in your perfect little house." I didn't respond. I didn't even flinch. I just stood my ground, a statue of newfound resolve. Kyle was the worst, of course. As he dragged his oversized, ridiculously heavy suitcase out the door, he made sure to let it scrape along the doorframe, leaving a long, deep scratch in the fresh white paint. He looked back at me over his shoulder with a smirk, a look of childish defiance. I met his gaze, then calmly lifted my phone, which had been in my hand the whole time, and took a clear, time-stamped picture of the damage, and then one of his smirking face. His smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine concern. He finally understood that I was documenting everything. The exodus took the full 3 hours allotted. They stuffed their belongings back into their vehicles with a sullen, angry energy. Pillows were crammed into back windows, duffel bags were thrown with unnecessary force. As Kyle was leaving, he accidentally kicked over the large terracotta pot of vibrant red geraniums I had on the porch, shattering it and spilling dirt and flowers everywhere. He didn't stop. He didn't apologize. He just kept walking. Mark never came downstairs. I heard his voice a few times, a low murmur from upstairs where he was presumably helping Jessica pack, but he didn't face me. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't try to defend me or them. He was a coward to the very end, a ghost in the machine of his wife's family. Jessica was the last one to leave. She stood before me on the porch, amidst the dirt from my shattered planter, her face a tight mask of pure fury. Her free ride was over, her power had been stripped away, and she was furious not at her own reprehensible behavior, but at the fact that I had finally, after all these years, put a stop to it. "You've ruined this family, Carol," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "All of this just because you couldn't be a little accommodating. You'll regret this. You'll die old and alone." I looked at her, at this woman who had taken so much from me for so long, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. She thought power was in taking, in demanding, in controlling. She couldn't understand that true power was in the ability to say no. "The only thing I regret, Jessica," I said calmly, my voice even and strong, "is not doing this 7 years ago. Have a safe trip." Her face contorted in rage. She spun around and stormed to her car without another word. As the last car, the big Ford Expedition, sped away, kicking up gravel from my driveway in a final impotent display of anger, a profound quiet settled over my property. The invasion was over. It was finally over. Or so I thought. Because when I thanked Deputy Miller for his invaluable service and went back inside, I found a single folded note left on the dining room table, right on top of one of the unsigned contracts. It was Mark's neat, familiar handwriting. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked up the folded piece of paper. It wasn't a long, heartfelt letter. It wasn't an apology or even a clumsy attempt at an explanation. It was a single sentence written in my son's neat, careful script, the same handwriting I had taught him at our old kitchen table so many years ago. "I can't believe you could be this cold-hearted." That was it. No signature. Just a final passive-aggressive jab. A parting shot designed to inflict maximum guilt. The old Carol, the basement-dwelling Carol, would have cried. She would have clutched that piece of paper to her chest and agonized over it for days. She would have reread it a dozen times, searching for some hidden meaning, some sign of the loving son she once knew beneath the cold, accusatory words. The new Carol, however, was done searching for things that weren't there. I walked over to the kitchen trash can, which was already overflowing with their garbage, tore the note into 4 precise, equal pieces and dropped them in. It was a surprisingly cathartic act. The house was a disaster. A complete and utter wreck. Now that the chaotic energy of 22 people was gone, the sheer scale of the filth and damage was even more apparent. There were empty food containers, damp towels, scuff marks on the walls, and dirt tracked all over the carpets. The foul smell from the bathroom still lingered like a ghost. For a moment, the sheer scale of the cleanup felt overwhelming, a mountain of work that seemed impossible to climb. But then I remembered. This wasn't my mess to clean. This was evidence. I took out my phone and began my final round of documentation. I was methodical like a crime scene investigator. I walked through every single room, taking pictures of everything. The broken faucet, the deep angry scratch on the doorframe, the shattered pot and spilled dirt on the porch, the mountains of trash they had left behind, the deep muddy footprints on my beige living room rug, the purple soda stain on the porch cushion. I took over 100 high-resolution, time-stamped photos, creating a comprehensive, undeniable catalog of their disrespect. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to a highly rated professional cleaning service I found online. I explained the situation and requested their most intensive, move-out style deep clean. I also requested an itemized invoice. The woman on the phone was sympathetic and scheduled a team for the next morning. The second call was back to George the plumber. I authorized him to begin the expensive, invasive work on the septic line as soon as his schedule allowed, and asked him to email me a formal, detailed invoice for the full amount. The next day, while the cleaning crew in their professional uniforms worked their magic, scrubbing and disinfecting and restoring my home to its former glory, I sat at my now sparkling kitchen table and composed an email. It was a masterpiece of cold, corporate professionalism. The recipient was Jessica. I also CC'd my son Mark at his work email address. The subject line was simple and impossible to ignore. Final invoice for stay at 124 Willow Creek Lane. The body of the email was simple, professional, and completely devoid of emotion. It read, "Dear Jessica, please find attached the final, itemized invoice for your family's recent stay at my property from start date to end date. The invoice includes the full cost of remediation for damages incurred during your occupancy. The itemized charges are as follows: a professional deep cleaning and sanitation services, a replacement and installation of guest bathroom faucet, a repair of damaged door frame and professional repainting, a replacement of destroyed porch planter and soil, full excavation and repair of the main septic line as per the attached plumber's estimate. The total amount due is $6,275.48. Please remit payment in the form of a cashier's check within 30 days to avoid further legal action to collect this debt. All relevant documentation, including receipts and photographic evidence, has been retained. Sincerely, Carol Peterson, homeowner." I attached every single receipt, every estimate, and a PDF file containing the 50 most damning photographs. Then I hit send without a moment's hesitation. I didn't expect a reply, and I certainly didn't expect to get the money without a fight. That wasn't the point. The point was the accounting. The point was that the days of me silently absorbing the financial and emotional cost of their existence were over. From now on, they would pay for what they broke. The days that followed were blissfully, wonderfully quiet. The professional cleaning crew had been miracle workers, erasing every physical trace of the invasion. They had scrubbed and disinfected and polished until the house gleamed, and more importantly, until it smelled like home again, like lemon polish and fresh air, not stale beer and resentment. George the plumber and his team came, and after 2 noisy days of digging with a small backhoe, they repaired the septic line, replacing the damaged section of pipe and leaving behind a neat patch of fresh sod that I promised myself I would nurture and care for. My house was whole again. And so, it seemed, was I. But I knew that simply cleaning up the mess wasn't enough. A fortress needs more than clean floors. It needs strong walls and a locked gate. You don't just sweep up after an invasion. You reinforce your defenses to make sure it never happens again. My first act of fortification was to call a locksmith. A friendly, reliable man named Hank came that afternoon. He replaced every single lock on every door, including the sliding glass door to the porch. He even installed a new heavy-duty deadbolt on the front door. He handed me a set of 3 new shiny keys that no one else in the world had a copy of. The feeling of turning that new key in the lock for the first time was indescribably satisfying. It was the solid, definitive sound of true security, of absolute control over my own threshold. Next, I went to the local hardware and garden store. I bought a new, beautiful terracotta pot, even larger than the last one, and a bag of rich, dark potting soil. I spent the afternoon carefully repotting my bruised but surviving geraniums, my hands covered in dirt. It felt grounding, like I was literally putting down new roots. As I worked, my next-door neighbor, a kind-looking woman with a warm smile named Sharon, came over, holding a plate of what turned out to be delicious lemon poppy seed muffins. "I saw the small army that was staying with you," she said with a sympathetic smile that held no judgment. "And I saw them leave in quite a hurry. Just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm much better now, thank you," I said, and a genuine smile spread across my face. For the first time, I felt a sense of community, of being seen. "I'm Carol." "Sharon. Welcome to the neighborhood for real this time," she laughed. "If you ever need anything, a cup of sugar, a hand with a heavy pot, or if you see another caravan of doom coming down the road, you just call me." We chatted for a while about gardening and the best places to see the sunset over the lake. It felt so normal, so wonderfully simple. This was what I had moved here for. Quiet conversations, friendly neighbors, and the freedom to plant flowers in peace without fear of them being trampled. My final act of fortification was more symbolic, but no less important. I took down the generic wrought iron welcome sign that had been hanging by the door when I bought the house. I replaced it with a small, elegant wooden plaque I had custom ordered online that morning. It arrived a few days later. In beautiful, simple script it read, "The Haven. By invitation only." Life settled into a peaceful, predictable rhythm. I woke with the sun, drank my coffee on the porch, worked in my small but thriving garden, and read novels in the afternoon with my feet up. I explored the small town, discovering a charming little bookstore and a cafe that made the best lemon scones I'd ever tasted. I was no longer just an extension of someone else's life, a supporting character in their drama. I was the main character in my own quiet, happy story. I was healing. The silence in the house wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of peace, full of potential, full of the sound of my own thoughts. I was no longer afraid of the phone ringing. I was no longer bracing for the next demand. My house was no longer just a property. It was a fortress. It was my haven. And I knew one final step was needed to protect this peace and this haven forever. A week after the Great Exodus, after the last of the invoices had been sent and the last lock had been changed, I scheduled an appointment with an estate planning attorney in town. His name was Arthur Davies, and he had the kind, patient eyes of a man who had seen every flavor of family drama imaginable. I walked into his quiet, wood-paneled office feeling not like a victim, not like a bitter old woman, but like a CEO of my own life, ready to make a crucial executive decision about the future of my most valuable asset. I had a simple will, of course, one that had been written years ago when David was still alive. It was a straightforward document that left everything split evenly between our 2 children. Of course, back then, my son Mark was the only child we had, and the idea of him being anything other than a loving, respectful son was unthinkable. Now my assets included this house, my single greatest achievement of financial independence, a symbol of my escape and my survival. And I could not stomach the thought of Jessica one day living in it, hosting her destructive family, and laughing about the time they drove the old woman out and inherited her beautiful Lakeside home. "I don't want to disinherit my son," I explained to Mr. Davies, my voice steady. "In my heart, he is still my child, and I grieve for the relationship we've lost. But I cannot, in good conscience, allow my life's work, everything I scraped and saved for, to be passed down to people who have shown it, and me, such profound and malicious disrespect." Mr. Davies nodded slowly, a look of complete understanding on his face. He didn't seem shocked or surprised. "This is more common than you might think, Miss Peterson," he said gently. "The law provides for situations just like this. We can certainly address your concerns. I would suggest we amend your living trust with what is sometimes called a character clause, or a behavioral incentive." He was a master of his craft. He didn't suggest anything cruel or petty. He suggested something powerful, legal, and elegant. We spent the next hour drafting the language, making sure it was ironclad and unambiguous. We didn't change the beneficiaries. Mark was still listed as the primary heir to my estate. But we added a new, binding article to the trust document, an article that would act as a gatekeeper to my legacy. The clause was simple in its concept, but its implications were monumental. It read, "The inheritance of any and all real estate property contained within this trust is contingent upon the beneficiary having demonstrated a consistent and verifiable pattern of personal respect, kindness, and emotional support toward the grantor during her lifetime. This pattern of behavior includes, but is not limited to, regular communication, offers of assistance, and a general conduct of goodwill. The final determination of this condition having been met shall be at the sole and absolute discretion of the appointed trustee." And the trustee, we decided, would not be Mark. It would not be anyone in the family. It would be a neutral third party, a professional fiduciary from the local bank, a man who would have no emotional stake in the outcome. He would be a judge, and the evidence would be the life I lived from this day forward. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing my son for his weakness. It was about structure. It was about creating a legacy that valued character above bloodlines. It was a clear, legally binding message. The price of admission to my legacy was simple human decency. A price, I suspected, that Jessica and her family would be unwilling and unable to pay. My house, my rules, even after I'm gone. I walked out of that office into the bright afternoon sun feeling 10 feet tall. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I didn't even know I was still carrying. I had protected my past, my present, and my future. I had drawn a line in the sand not with anger, but with the full force of the law. I had ensured that my haven would remain a haven, a symbol not of what was taken from me, but of what I had the strength to build and protect for myself. It's been 6 months now since the showdown, since the day I took my life back. I never received a reply to my email invoice, nor did a check ever arrive in the mail. I didn't pursue it legally. The victory was never about the money. It was about the silence. A beautiful, profound, and healing silence that now fills my home. It's the sound of freedom. Mark has tried to call a few times. The first few times, the caller ID sent a jolt of anxiety through me, a Pavlovian response from years of conditioning. But I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. The messages were short, clipped, and awkward. "Hey mom, just calling to, see how you are." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the damage, financial or emotional, no responsibility taken. He just wanted to smooth things over, to pretend it never happened, so that the door to my life and my assets wouldn't be permanently closed. I haven't called him back. I'm not ready. Maybe one day I will be, but for now my peace is too new, too precious to risk cracking it open for his comfort. True healing, I'm learning, requires time and distance, and I am finally giving myself the gift of both. My life is quiet now, but it's not lonely. It's full. My friendship with my neighbor Sharon has blossomed. We have a standing coffee date every Friday morning on one of our porches. I've joined a book club in town, filled with smart, funny women who have lived fascinating lives. I've taken up watercolor painting, something I've always wanted to do but never had the time or the mental space for. I set up my easel on the porch and try to capture the way the light changes on the surface of the lake, the deep greens of the pines, the brilliant oranges of the sunset. Most of my paintings are terrible, but that doesn't matter. The act of creating, of making something beautiful just for myself, is what's important. Sometimes, as I sit here, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, I think about the word family. For so long I thought it meant unconditional sacrifice. I thought it meant absorbing other people's chaos, their demands, their disrespect, and calling it love. I was wrong. Family should be a safe harbor, not a storm you have to constantly brace for. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for them, is to cut the ropes to the ships that are trying to sink you. You can't save a drowning person if they are determined to pull you under with them. My haven is truly a haven now. The wind chimes I hung on the porch tinkle softly in the breeze, a sound I can finally hear. The geraniums are blooming, vibrant and defiant in their new unbroken pot. The house doesn't feel empty with just me in it. It feels perfectly, completely full. It's full of my books, my paintings, my peace, my rules. My story is a reminder that it is never, ever too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to reclaim your space, to set your boundaries, and to demand the respect you deserve. You are the architect of your own life. Don't let anyone else hijack the blueprints and build a prison where your sanctuary should be. Sometimes you have to burn a few bridges not out of anger, but to light the way to a better future. A future that is peacefully, wonderfully, and unapologetically yours. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me to be able to share it and feel heard. If you've ever had to fight for your own space, your own peace, or set a difficult boundary with family, please share your experience in the comments below. Reading your stories makes us all feel a little less alone in these struggles. And of course, if you enjoyed this, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Take care of yourselves and be good to yourselves. You deserve it.